So I'm here with Dr. Joan Clos, former Executive Director of UN Habitat. Welcome, Dr. Clos.
It's a pleasure.
So you have an incredible story going from medical doctor to diplomat to politician, head of the United Nations organization. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What is it about cities that attracted you?
Well, I was in the government of the city of Barcelona for many years. After the end of the dictatorship of General Franco, in the first democratic elections, we had the opportunity to be engaged in the governance of Barcelona, first as Director of Public Health, and later on as councilman, and then in different responsibilities, and then I ended up as being the mayor. And that gave me a long period of experience in try to manage the transition of Barcelona from a typical industrial city to a clearly post-industrial city. And I think that in this transition, which it was a transition in political terms, but also in economic terms, it was a very interesting experience of managing change. Which is something that it's very interesting.
So we talk all the time now about how the world is rapidly urbanizing. What are the biggest challenges posed by the unprecedented pace and scale of urbanization today?
Well, I think that the biggest challenge is that the current model of urbanization is still following the lines of the modern movement. And the ideology or the main concepts of urbanization still come from the 30s of the last century. And after the Second World War, this has spread over the world, and we are seeing an urbanization which is very repetitive. It's very similar every place in the world. It's quite often that you see a kind of new town or new neighborhood in a town that it's a replica of something else that you have seen in other part of the world. And this is losing character, is losing cultural value, and also it's losing productivity at the end. And I think that the biggest challenge is that this success of what I call the international urban model is a short-term commercial success and as a long-term failure, because at the long term this model of urbanization is not sustainable. It's not sustainable economically, because it's based on the sprawl, and therefore the cost per capita of the services, it's unsustainable. But it's also unsustainable in terms of environment, because this kind of urbanization, it favors the limitless demand of mobility. And lately, it's also unsustainable socially, because it segregates the population and it creates quite of inequality problems that it's also very challenging. They are very challenging. And what I consider now is that we need to check out this model, and we need to propose a very different model of urbanization if we want to access to a more sustainable model.
So 2 years ago, nearly 2 years ago now, we adopted the New Urban Agenda at Habitat 3. 193 countries adopted this document. Can you tell me about the importance of this document in that moment?
Well, the New Urban Agenda provides a set of ideas which are a little bit a change of pace in the approach to urbanization in relation to what we have been debating until now. I think that there's one of the paradigms that the New Urban Agenda is promoting is to consider urbanization as a tool for sustainable development. And that it's quite new, because the approach to urbanization historically has not been very much related to to development and least to sustainable development. In general, the common sense uses to attach urbanization as an outcome of development, but not as a factor of development. And what we want to debate and to propose is that urbanization is a tool for development, is a factor of development. There are new realities, new evidence that support this question, especially through geographic economy and other disciplines, which are proposing a new function of development, especially in the post-industrial society. In the post-industrial society, clearly, one of the sources of development is well-managed urbanization. And this is new in the narrative about urbanization. And as urbanization is spreading very, very fast, it's important that this new idea is soon taken in consideration, because it helps to define priorities in the always very complex issue of prioritizing when you have few money and you need to do something in order to improve the city. And what are the factors that increase value in a proper urbanization? For example, one of the factors is public space. And public space has not been, it has been more considered as a kind of, let's say, activist, demand or ideological demand, and it has not been considered from the economic point of view. And when you think about what it adds value to of location, for example, which is one of the well-known values of urbanization, is the quality and quantity of public space. And this kind of approach, which is, it has factual, and is based on data and in analysis to the contribution of public space to urban value, it helps to take decisions that otherwise, if they are presented only from the ideological point of view, it takes much more time to convince the decision makers. But I have mentioned public space, but I can mention, proper density of adequate compactness or mixed use of the urban tissue, which all of them are values are options that help to increase the value of urbanization.
So I want to latch on to what you were saying about public space. I mean, walking around here at the World Urban Forum, everybody's talking about the importance of public space, but there's still so many barriers to ensuring a public space agenda. How do we overcome some of these barriers? Finance, you mentioned, was one of them.
Yes, I think that one needs to understand that public space is the origin of urban value. And without adequate public space, there's no urban value. If you go to the history of urbanization, at the end of the 19th century, it was established and a rule that every plot should have access to the public space, which changed a little bit the scenario of urbanization. And in many places, especially in slums and others, poor urbanized arrangements, you still have plots that they don't have access to public space. Then the concept of public space, which is streets, plazas, places of gathering and encounter, in a well-planned city tends to represent nearly 50% of the land. And when you say that directly to the city managers or to politicians, that 50% of the land should be allocated to the public space. They impossible. They react totally with absolute unbelief. They cannot accept that public space should amount as much as 50%. But they don't understand that the value of the remaining 50%, it depends totally on the quality of these other 50%. When somebody is exposed to the figure, I usually try to ask everybody, what do you think is the public space of Manhattan? Because a lot of people has an idea of what Manhattan is. And people, you know, hesitate, and you have different answers, 20, 30. Only very few people provides the right answer, which, by the way, is 49%, 50%. One of the most valuable, or probably the most valuable place in the world, in terms of cost, it has a provision of 50% of public space.
Incredible.
You know, and that is a shock. It's counterintuitive. But if you analyze that, of course, if you want to buy a piece of land, you would like a piece of land very well related with the public space, or in front of a garden, or in front of a well-connected street, or or nearby metro station, or whatever. Then there's another factor which needs to be clarified. When during the night the mayor invests in the city, in the public space of the city, if the mayor during the night decides that he's going to lay down a cable of optic fiber in your street where you have a plot, what happens with the value of your plot?
Increases.
It goes up. And then this very also an not intuitive relationship between public investment and private value. All that should be accounted for, because otherwise you can end up with a speculation, with appropriation of public goods, and without contributing, etc. Then the deep knowledge of what are these relationships, these economic relationships between public space and private value must be clearly understood, especially by the rulers of the city. Otherwise, there's not going to be enough public space, and there's not going to be proper allocation of the costs and benefits of the public space. And this is what is happening. We do satellite photos of cities, and we see that the new neighborhoods around the world, the public space now is diminishing. It's on the around 22%. Instead of 50%, it's 22%. And this is a very clear example of a short-term reasoning, which, you know, at short term it can be profitable to provide less public space because the owner of the land, he has the feeling that he makes a better deal, a better business, but a long term it's a loss, because you lose value as you increase the density, because then if you have only 22% of public space, then you are going to have a congestion, you are going to have many ills of the urbanization. It's a clear example of short-term wins and long-term loss. Right. All that should be understood. And if that is not understood, and claim for public space is only ideological, you run the risk of losing the battle. And I think that this is what needs to be stressed, and you need to do the accounting well. in order to understand what is the most performing form of the city. Well, public space, of course, is not just an economical good. It's a social good. It allows for communication between the people. It allows for the mixture of the city. The poor and the rich are the same in the public space. It has a lot of ideological value, but should be presented in its fullness, not only on its partial contributions to the well-being.
I mean, the whole idea shifting then from viewing public space as an amenity to also seeing it as an asset as well.
Of course.
It's incredible though to hear this from a former mayor as well, because we speak to a lot of our partners and ask them what are the biggest challenges, and a lot of them say that it's convincing local government. So I think it's a strong testimony hearing it from a former mayor. Another question I wanted to ask you though is, you've probably spoken to more people at this conference than anyone. What are some of the key discussion points that are taking place this week?
Well, I think that the idea of the new urban agenda is beginning to take root. This feeling that something should be done to change the destiny of cities, it's taking now stock, because it's clear that the current model of urbanization, as I said before, is unsustainable. Because all the mayors, they are saying that they have problem of congestion, they have problem of costs, lack of accessibility to housing, etc. There are quite a number of issues that are common in the conversation, and therefore one needs to advance in this review of the urbanization, critical review of urbanization, to change the model, the current model. I think that finally we need to overcome, or we need to go the next step further away from the modern movement. We are still tributaries of the modern movement, and which, by the way, it was generated when the car began to exist. It was totally linked to the utopian freedom provided by the car. And in fact, if you look at the drawings of Corbusier, you see that the road or the big avenue takes the place of the public space, dominates the public space, because the car was the paradigm of individual freedom. It was supposed to be the happiness, the technological artifact that will provide freedom and happiness. 100 years later, because the modern movement was articulated in the 20s of the last century, we know that the car is not everything. They were cities before the car and are going to be cities after the car, at least after the car as we know it today. And therefore we need to build a new city at the scale of the humans. I think that we need to recover the scale. One of the problems of the modern movement is that through its ideas, the scale changed from the human to first to the car, and then to a big number of cars, to the motorway, nearly the motorway inside. If you go and see the plan of Chandigarh, you see even how he put the houses in close neighborhoods, just surrounded by huge motorways. Then, okay, we need to rebuild that and to recover the human scale of the city. I think that architects like Gell and others are insisting very much about the issue of the scale, and I think that is something that is urgent, to recover the scale. And even in this kind of exercises of public space, like in Manhattan with the recovery of Times Square or of this elevated, I don't remember the name, this elevated place with the former train tracks.
The High Line.
High Line, where you put cafes and seats, where you can walk around without much cars. People are just, they enjoy these places. In that sense, Jane Jacobs would be very happy to see that there's a tide to return to this human scale.
Well, you already started alluding to this, so I'm going to go into it, but today you launched the Quito Papers, which in many ways is a rebuttal to the Charter of Athens. Can you tell us a little bit about what this is all about and what we can take away from this in concrete terms?
Yes, I think that those ideas of mixed use, we need to finish the excess of zoning. The zoning has gone too far away, especially when it segregates the uses of the land, differentiating what is housing, of what is economic activity, what is recreational, what is, university. This excess of zoning has segregated the use of the city and has generated huge demand of mobility. Because the economies of agglomeration associated to the city is due to the proximity of the factors of production. Therefore, what is the point of segregating too much the functions of the land? And therefore, we need to go back to the mixed use. And then also to the density. Another segregation, which is a spatial segregation, is the sprawl. If we don't address the issue of certain logical levels of compactness, we are losing the essence of the city. And with the satellites, we know now that most of the urbanization built anew in the world, it's done at the densities of less than 4,000 inhabitants per kilometer square. At 4,000 inhabitants per kilometer square, you are not building a city. No, at least 10,000 or 15,000. I'm not talking about the densities of New York or Hong Kong or London, which are on top of 40, 50 or 100,000. But 4,000, come on. This is not, we cannot talk about real urban tissue at 4,000 inhabitants per kilometer square. And I think that those basic concepts, and I am talking purposely about numbers and figures, because I think that we need to go back to quantitative aspects of urbanization, because if we only talk about qualitative aspects, we run the risk of missing the point. I am ready to talk about qualitative aspects and social and political values, etc. But I think that what is most needed now is to recover the quantitative aspects of urbanization, because we run the risk of losing the purpose, losing the direction in the correct process to attain sustainable urbanization, and also sustainable in economic terms. With less than 4,000 inhabitants per kilometer square, the cost of the urban services per capita skyrocket. If you want to provide good water, good sanitation, good drainage, good lighting, at less than 4,000 inhabitants per kilometer square, very few economies can pay that. Only the very rich can pay that. Therefore, let's bring some numbers to the question.
A good message to end on. One last thing I want to ask you, though, as we leave Kuala Lumpur and Wonderful World Urban Forum, are we feeling optimistic?
Well, yes, yes, yes. I am. Well, I think that we should be optimistic because in life it's about improving and and fighting for a better future. But also we need to commit ourselves to the change. Then it's optimism with action, not just only with ideas.
I like that, optimism with action. Dr. Clos, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to you.